Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to day 3 of the Artist in Residence Lecture Series. I hope you've all had a chance to play in the sunshine today. It's so gorgeous out there. Maybe we can move this outside. What do you think? Nah, probably not. Okay. Good thought, though. Okay, today we'll be hearing presentations from Martha Mysko and Willie Wayne Smith, co-interim artist in residence in the painting department. The presentation from Scott Klinker, designer in residence in 3D design, that was originally scheduled for today, has been moved to Monday, September 23rd, due to unforeseen circumstances. So come back on Monday to hear Scott. Today we'll hear from Martha first. Okay, Martha Mysko is the co-interim artist in residence in the painting department. Martha employs the language of painting while working across installation, sculpture, photography, and digital media. In the fall of 2018, she was co-artist in residence in the painting department at Cranbrook as a sabbatical replacement. Martha has had solo exhibitions at Wasserman Projects in Detroit, Mark Strauss Gallery in New York, and Sadie Halley Projects in Brooklyn, New York, among others. She has participated in numerous group exhibitions across the U.S. and has had 2-person collaborative exhibitions at galleries and venues, including Elephant Art Space in Los Angeles, Holiday Forever Gallery in Jackson Hole, and Small Editions Studio and Culture Room in Brooklyn. She will have work in an upcoming group show at the Art Lot, an outdoor public exhibition space in Brooklyn, which will be on view this October through May of 2020. In November, she opens a collaborative 2-person exhibition with co-artist in residence Willie Wayne Smith at Fjord in Philadelphia, which will be on view through December 21st. Martha graduated from the painting department at Cranbrook in 2011. Please welcome Martha Mysko.
So I'm going to focus on selected work from over the past 7 years that I've either been actively thinking about in the context of my latest work, or that in the process of putting this presentation together, I found aspects of that I might want to revisit in the future. When I get my work to a point of completion, I assess where it fails, and I use that to propel the next piece. Every day that I go into the studio, I really do try to identify what I'm excited about and what is challenging to me. The two are not necessarily mutually exclusive, and if I can't identify one or the other, then I just start making moves and engaging in formal investigations without a plan. And if that doesn't work, then I go shopping. Being a consumer plays a major role in my process. I am a frugal consumer, though. I frequent the thrift stores. I think of them as museums of recent history, and they also provide me with a palette. So my work is temporary. It's reliant on physical space and objects, primarily domestic objects and objects that are evocative of the past. At the same time, I'm interested in concerns and ideas relating to painting. You will notice in a lot of my work an emphasis on frontality, a front stage, backstage dichotomy, as well as recurring themes and motifs like screens, windows, and frames. I try to work fluidly between the digital and the physical. I find that digital processes allow my work to become generative. One innocuous object can be the catalyst for an entire installation. And digital processes allow the work to grow and to become abstracted. I like to create tension between raw tactile surfaces and the clean space of the screen. So the works that I've been showing are from my first solo exhibition at Mark Strauss Gallery the year after I graduated from Cranbrook. When I came here as a student, I was working already in installation and assemblage, but my background was in painting. The expanded field was really at the forefront of the dialogue around contemporary painting. So there was a lot being written about artists working in this way, like Jessica Stockholder, Katarina Gross, Isa Genskin. I was also really inspired by Pippoletti Rist, whose videos can be seen as investigating painting and space. So the possibilities for me to explore and engage in the conversation around painting as a spatial practice felt really endless, and it still does today. A lot of the materials in this show were reused from previous work. which is something that I began to do over the course of my 2 years at Cranbrook, building up an installation, allowing it to exist for a time, and then breaking it down and reusing the parts. So in this particular piece, the carpet I had been using for 3 years at this point. I was interested in how, as a result, an indexical and process-based narrative was building on the surface through paint and in form through physical fragmentation. I work towards a formal resolve, and at the same time, I push and exaggerate the cultural connotations of my materials. So there's another implied narrative or potential narrative given the associative aspects of the objects that I choose. With the work in this exhibition, I made a really conscious decision to get very specific with my materials, and this is something that I'm trying to focus more and more on right now in my current work. So rather than relying solely on what I could recycle or whatever I would come across on the sidewalk, I was seeking out specific materials familiar from my past on eBay. So like these particular bed sheets. They have personal associations, but they're also somewhat ubiquitous and generic at the same time. This was the first piece that you encountered when entering the gallery. There's a play on the blurring of interior and exterior, as well as where one work ends and the other begins. I like thinking about how separate parts can become magnetic. And while the objects I use are from my past, the work is not intended to be nostalgic, and I actively avoid that. So this is a panoramic image of an installation I made for the Hudson Valley Center for Contemporary Art in an old carriage house in upstate New York. I see this piece as kind of a reaction to the previous body of work where everything was becoming very contained. For this work, I wanted to create large gestures and for the space to be completely immersive and to have a cinematic feel. I was also trying to push further that blurring of interior and exterior. So this work came out of an impulse to get rid of a lot of the materials that I was feeling really weighed down by. It kind of reminds me of a Caspar David Friedrich painting, and while that wasn't intentional, that's something that I can look back on now and consider how I might make that happen in a future work with intention. So the next body of work that I'm going to show is from my second solo show at Mark Strauss. And I made this zine as a takeaway. A fellow colleague from Cranbrook Painting wrote about the work. So just a reminder to everyone to meet and talk with as many people as you can, because the rich conversations around art really do continue after you graduate. I'm just going to read through his text as I click through the images. So if formal abstraction is most concerned with an elevated plane to arrange the visual into parts, then Martha is most concerned with the arrangement of the basement. Taking to the floor, even the clouds verge on musty. Formal abstraction does not welcome her very specific nouns. Her composition talks in a language of secondhand trade and a pre-IKEA lifespan of shelves, couches, ceiling fans, plastic fruit, and flowers. No doubt, it is easy to imagine her work being mistaken for the remnants of a renovation hauled to the street to the dump. And that did actually happen to me. You can ask me about it sometime. As though the window of the picture plane were left open overnight and one returns to find their things in a pre-linguistic imbroglio. Visual representation gets hyphenated. Hula couch, 12 phone, chain link, chair leg, faux fire bowl. Banisters and still lifes may retain their identifiable charm, but there is never any promise they won't fall into the mill. Churning out images, slivers, doubles, reproductions, half-semblances of half-assembled image objects that basically smirk at their own reflection. The pastels and flower petals flirt with a cloying sentimentality. That is, until the couch is torn in half. Once the springs are exposed, there's nowhere to sit. not as though anyone asked you to anyway. The interplay of physical objects with their analog and digital reproductions always tends to alarm an ontological crisis. However, instead of an inquiry into the realness of a chair, Martha calls bullshit on sugary-coated platitudes. The candy is too big, too sweet to suck on. The fire inside is unplugged. When I'm singing to, my affection is a glitch, and affectation feels smooth as wallpaper. So this next body of work, I wanted to emulate a fictional teenage bedroom, and I based it very loosely on the first chapter of an R.L. Stine book, which is essentially horror fiction for middle schoolers. So I was looking at tropes in bad psychological thrillers and made-for-TV movies. Some of these tropes I was recognizing from early experimental film, like Maya Deren's Meshes of the Afternoon. So, for example, the phone left off the hook, the corsage fallen on the floor. Both of these works are carpet with a section torn away to reveal a printed photo rug. So I was playing with, again, that tension between image and object. They also function like screens. There's saturation and a layer of removal. I was also thinking about how to construct the presence of a fictional character in a superficial way, how to create melodrama, and also thinking about how art languages are subsumed into a consumerist and advertising culture. So the cloud motif, for example, in the eye on the screen is reminiscent of Magritte. It also appears on the wallpaper. The image on the screen is an ad in a teen magazine for contact lenses. So this is another trope that I notice in a lot of bad movies, focusing on the music box spinning. So the video playing is just a zoomed-in version of what plays from inside of the music box. So I didn't show this piece last year because I really don't like it, but I wanted to show it because I've been thinking a lot lately about how a larger installation can generate smaller works, offshoots or relics. So I took from this installation to create this work. So again, the video is what's playing inside of the sculpture. And this installation in particular, I'm still using the materials from that installation. I just created a work this year that I'll show you later. So the next body of work I'm going to show you is called War of the Roses. It started based off of this Magritte painting. I wanted to invoke him as I feel an affinity with him, utilizing pop, psychology, humor, and wordplay in some of my work. So I used this as a direct reference. And this show was completely immersive. I wanted it to be a bit macabre. And everything in the show interrelates. So with this particular piece, the image on the left is on the screen, in the sculpture on the right, and there is no movement or video, but there is sound to this piece, and it's 15 minutes of different introductory scores to Lifetime movies. And you'll be able to hear the sound in the next two videos. So again, kind of another Magritte reference, but using a pear instead of an apple. This was a projection from the ceiling onto a slanted floor, and the handheld mirror that's on the ground projects the sky back onto the ceiling. You'll notice that I leave the watermark on the video in the animation in the sky section, and so I do that in the same way that with a lot of my objects, I leave the price tags on I never really dust off my surfaces. I like that really quick illusion and sense of magic that breaks down very quickly. So this is a vacuum sealed bag that I see as relating to the space of the basement, to storage, compression, impenetrable surfaces. So this work I made at a time when I was moving out of New York, and this was for the Art and Buildings program in New York in the West Village. It's a window installation. This work was made primarily from my computer, so I was reading Anne Friedberg's The Virtual Window and thinking about that, and I'm just going to read a bit from her. The metaphors of windows, mirrors, frames, screens fall into a slippery discursive tumble of synecdoche and displacement. With all of these metaphoric figures, it will be important to underline the dynamic interaction between the place of the viewing subject and the framed view. As images move across the screens of cinema, television, and the computer, the viewer's immobility meets a paradoxical mobility when moving images are seen within a frame. As screens contain other screens in a nested meson beam of multiple frames, as quattrocentro perspective is both fractured and multiplied, the virtual window opens onto a new logic of visuality, a time architecture framed and virtual on a screen. And so when I made this piece, the text was already a little outdated at the time because it was written before so many people had iPhones and tablets. So I was thinking about that virtual window and perspective. How does that change when the viewer might potentially be passing by, might be mobile, or potentially standing in a fixed position from one or the other side of the window? This is Time Remaining, so another piece that I made when I was transitioning out of my studio. So I made this primarily on the computer. It's a large digital print with real objects attached to it and an embedded video. And I feel like with this work that I really got at that sense of taking objects and compressing them into a flat space that I had been wanting out of my work. I did manage to make one thing in the studio, one sculpture, and I wanted to show you this piece because I've been returning to casting this summer. This is cast sand, dyed sand, and resin. This work is called Moody Blues, and I think similarly to the Weekend Getaway piece, this one is kind of a reaction to the work that I had been making, where it was very heavily digital, and so I wanted to create something more tactile. I do see this work as still relating to networks and the digital, though, because the curator of the show curated small artworks into my installation. So the painting on the left, there's a red painting you can see, and a small blue one on the right. So there are works. There's a vase on the pedestal. So there are works within my installation. And this is just an example of a video that was projected into the space. So the next few slides I'm going to show are from a collaborative two-person show with Willie Wayne Smith. The show was called How It Unfolds, and it was a fully collaborative work. So we wanted to create or suggest a narrative. He would make paintings based off of my materials that I was finding based on characters that he invented in a drawing for a painting of various characters at a truck stop. So just as an example, you can see here, there's a small carousel horse figurine head in the top left corner of my sculpture that also appears in his painting. And I wanted to show this work because we are working on a collaborative installation right now, and so I'm excited to work together in this way, but to do so in a work that is more fully immersive. So when I say fully immersive, like a piece like this, Selective Memory, which was at Wasserman Projects in 2017, For this show, I was really playing with color here. For the past year, I had been really focusing on creating installations in a dominant hue. I was thinking about how to create a narrative where a lot of information is missing, or creating a kind of stage set with no action and the actors are gone. So these are multiple vignettes that bleed into each other. So it was really after a space that feels as full as it does empty. This is another collaborative exhibition, this time with Emily Natchison-Endo. It's called Liquid Nails. Again, working in a dominant hue. We exchanged images online over the course of 6 months leading up to the show. So we created a skeleton framework and then brought it together from separate coasts and worked together collaboratively on site. We were thinking about consumption, dreamscapes, disappointment, and reverie. This is one of the first works that I made after coming back from LA. I was really excited about this particular piece that I hadn't planned on making, and it just kind of happened very quickly. There was something sort of anthropomorphic about it, which reminded me of some of my earlier work, and I wanted to return to that. So for this particular piece, I was kind of trying to channel Mondrian, working only in primary colors. This is from last year as well, yellow-blue composition. There's just something about these trunks that I'm really interested in and hope to return to this year. I was also kind of excited about the cheap Brancusi sculpture. Cupid at the gate. So this year I've returned to making singular works, and I mentioned earlier with that installation that I was pretty unhappy with, that I was still working with those materials. So some of those materials appear in this work, as well as materials from the window installation. So this is a digital print on canvas, as well as other objects and materials. So the next series of images I'm going to show are work that I made over the summer these past few months. This work is called Wait, Wait. And as I said earlier, a huge part of my practice is going out and looking for objects. I can sometimes feel completely lost, and then I go out and I find something, and all of these possibilities open up for me. So this one in particular started with the hand weight that little statue is holding, and the mint green plate. So I'm questioning value, and I'm questioning taste, and I'm also working with objects that I'm just intuitively attracted to. I love how when I put an everyday object into this digital space, I see it in a completely new way, and it also really gives me material and a palette. This is vase face. I think I just got this idea from teaching Introduction to Drawing and using the vase face exercise, and seeing that over and over and wanting to use that as a motif in my own work. So the vase is cut out of hollow wood slab doors. And then there are objects inside that are hidden behind this digital print on semi-transparent fabric. And so this smaller work relates to that previous installation and that idea that I've been thinking about creating relics and smaller works or companion pieces. I was looking at the cut remnants of the wood doors that I had used for the vase face, and it reminded me of Matisse's cutouts, so I tried to push that reference a bit in this work. I think with both this piece and the vase face, they have that quick magic moment when they're plugged in, when the lights are plugged in and the video is playing. But then when you get up close to it, it really falls apart in its prop-like qualities. I started working again with casting. So this is cast cement, plastic, and foam. And I was just using ready-made molds like plastic bins and throwing objects in. There's a lot of chance involved. I don't know what objects are going to show up. And this one I made last week. I just wanted to be more conscientious about the ready-made molds that I was choosing. So this is cast plastic and foam and other objects like a curling iron, fake flowers, a ribbon. There are other things in there that didn't show up. But I just wanted to, be really specific about that choice in the object. And I'm excited to see what I can do with this project and how this will function within a larger piece. So I just want to end with what I'm excited about today and feeling challenged by are these 4 works, and thinking about how I could potentially bring these 4 modes, not necessarily these 4 pieces, but these 4 modes of making into one large-scale work. So utilizing the wall decal, the framing device, the cast object, and the cutout. So we'll see where it goes. That's it. I wish you all the best, and I guess I just want to say don't be afraid to fail big while you're here. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much, Martha. That was great. Okay, next up is Willie Wayne Smith. Willie is co-interim artist in residence in the painting department. He received his MFA in painting from Cranbrook Academy of Art in 2010 and his BFA in painting from the Maryland Institute College of Art in 2006. Last fall, he was a visiting co-artist in residence in the painting department at Cranbrook. Willie has had solo exhibitions at the Library Street Collective in Detroit, Sadie Halley projects in Brooklyn and Minneapolis, Good Weather Gallery in North Little Rock, and Serial Art in Philadelphia. He has been included in numerous 2-person and group exhibitions across the U.S. at galleries including Essex Flowers in Brooklyn, Atlanta Contemporary Arts Center, Storefront 10 Ike in Brooklyn, Field Projects in New York, and Central Park Gallery in Los Angeles, among others. Willie has recently exhibited his work with Library Street Collective at Expo Chicago in 2018 and the Dallas Art Fair in 2019, and with Good Weather Gallery at NADA, New York in 2017. His work is in numerous private collections and has been featured in LAR magazine and on Art Viewer and Art Space, where he was featured as one of 10 artists to discover at NADA, New York 2017. In November, he opens a collaborative 2-person exhibition with co-artist in residence Martha Mysko at Fjord in Philadelphia, which will be on view through December 21st. Please welcome Willie Wayne Smith.
Thank you, Judy. So first off, I want to say that I'm honored and excited to be here working with all of you this year. And I want to thank the other amazing artists in residence here who I've already learned so much from. So thank you. So this year, I wanted to do things just a little bit differently than I did last year and focus on ideas that circulate around the work. In order to do this, I'm going to become unstuck in time and not present the work in linear order. My work changes. My practice is meandering and open-ended and circular. I often make disparate things simultaneously, making it difficult to streamline sound bites that aren't contradictory or convoluted. So first, I'm going to show 2 bodies of work that I made at the same time as each other in 2015 and exhibited in 2 shows that opened at around the same point. The first is from a show called Consider My Tongue Swallowed. It's an installation of perceptually complicated paintings and objects derived from an imagined narrative of a daydreaming, derelict contractor who's probably hungover as he pines for his lost love. The second body of work culminated in this show, Loose Lips and Forgotten Lines, which was consisting of paintings loosely based on an idea of coloring book pages. The scenes are invented and then responded to automatically with text and gestural washes of paint. Here are some examples of cast paint tray liners, which were objects hanging in the first show, which functioned like paintings in the space. This one was called Some Time Away. That's actually a deli napkin dipped in glue with a cutout, floor sweepings, epoxy resin, and then a painted epoxy clay sculpture of a giant wad of chewing gum. Deeply Dappled Fuck This. Quiet Encore in a Depreciating Sky. Picking Up the Pieces, another work from the show. I'll have more images from this show sprinkled throughout the talk. This is an example of a show from the a painting from the show, Loose Lips and Forgotten Lines. This is an ongoing body of work for me. I'm still continuing to evolve it. I'm not sure if I'll ever be done with it, but for the time being, it's always going alongside of other projects. I usually try to discuss work on a case-by-case basis in clear and practical terms, allowing for a degree of access or understanding to new viewers, but my own thoughts about what I do are more multifaceted and forever changing. For instance, at one point, I might talk about the relationship of a chaotically filled coloring book page to our early experiences in creativity, narrative, and cultural standards of art making. I might then segue into how this plays into our understanding of gestural abstraction, or art as a collaborative social activity, as it can be understood through the works of Dadaist artists like Pacabia and artists later inspired by he and his peers. At another time, I might focus on the narrative aspects of the invented line drawing itself and the way that I use these images to create amalgams of my own experiences that I can then gain catharsis by reacting to impulsively. I might then veer into the problematic and embarrassing aspects of catharsis in art, or slip into anecdotal storytelling from my own life as it relates to the image. So for instance, in this image, we had a studio on Woodward Avenue during the height of Dream Cruise one summer, and I think I was very influenced by the activity around me. On another day, I might insist that the most interesting thing is simply the appropriation of the type of coloring book page that would be thrown away into the value system of contemporary art. I think that those are my more cynical days. Then subsequently struggle to explain why I deviated from the conceptual premise, why I incorporated soft focus imagery, and why the lines sit on top of the image. I'm never interested in concise or easy answers. Uncertainty and malleability of meaning are fundamental aspects of my work. I sometimes think about this in relation to the trajectory of Western avant-garde and modernist legacies, which inspired me early in my education with their embrace of doubt and failure and reactionary attitudes to accepted conventions of popular taste in art. By the time I began making my own work, however, these revolutionary ideas were all fully integrated into the fine art discourse and heavily institutionalized. This is an image of a show I had last fall in Minneapolis, more later. I primarily make paintings on canvas, and you'll have to forgive me for getting a little bit pedantic and general here, But to adequately express what I'm thinking about in my recent work, I think it's necessary to give you a backstory on my relationship with the medium. Painting's ubiquity makes historicism an inevitable aspect of the conversation. Who here has made a painting? Finger painting, watercolor. I think it's an activity that so many people are engaged in and have thought about, and there's been so much discussion that you have to immediately enter into the realm of what's already been done to engage with it. This is a painting from the last year called Pocono's Pontormo, an evolution from the coloring book paintings that I've been making. I began making paintings in a serious way while obtaining a thorough education of the many theoretical depths of painting and the exhaustive examples of what had come before. When working within this realm of academic post-history, I often had a hard time feeling self-actualized. This is a painting called My Girlfriend Thinks I Look Like Kurt Cobain. It's Kurt Cobain with a faux collage of my own eyes. Instead, I was like a stranger traversing a collaborative culture of histories and ideologies that I was excited by, but which were not fully my own. As someone raised between a missionary medical compound in Haiti and a fundamentalist Southern Baptist family in Central Florida, then attending a private art school on the East Coast, this was not a new feeling. So I decided to run with it. I became fully committed to being uncomfortably complicit in a conversation that was pre-existing, but to which I felt I could bring all of my individual subjectivity and impulses, doubts and experiences. There didn't seem to be a wrong way to go about it. Painting was dead after all. This is a painting from my first semester in graduate school that I think really illustrates my early conceptual dilemmas. It's an epic, absurdist self-portrait as a sociological mutant playing with garbage. The post-historical zombie is crouched uncomfortably exposed to the viewers, who are on the wrong side of the partial wall that he hoped might hide him while he engages in his serious yet suspect work. I think the painting operates in an ironic way like the work of Gustave Courbet, who often specifically dealt with his own societal role as an artist. But there's another aspect of the image that I want to focus on, which is the implication of possible transcendence. The block and the coffee cups are preparing to take flight. There's a sense that with the right muse and abstracted incantation on notebook paper, the useless debris he collected and labored over might become ascendant. It's significant to me that this doesn't happen in the painting itself, but is implied as something that could happen beyond or outside of it. Some of what I do could be called painting about painting, but I think that's a misnomer. There's no simple art about art or painting about painting. I think the phrases should be something more like painting about the world, or art about life. This is a painting, Christina's World, which I intended to be a sequel of Andrew Wyeth's painting by the same name. It's as if she's still out there in the field, perhaps for reasons that were out of her control. I rely heavily on stream of consciousness and intuition, often within some larger conceptual framework which evolves through the process. This is a painting called Things to Bury, invented objects that sort of imitated the types of things you might encounter in nature on the beach and suddenly pulled out of that realm of understanding with the world. Uncertain if it's man-made or natural or had a function or not. I think sometimes there are these small encounters. I love to invoke pre-established genres like portraiture, figuration, surrealism, landscape, and still life. This is a painting from the last year. This is a painting called Still Life. I actually inserted small fragments of my older brother's mugshot As I'm primarily my own audience, I tend to involve at times my loved ones or friends, sometimes amalgamating them into invented characters, sometimes using direct images of them. Even when I venture outside of the realm of standardized painting surfaces, I tend to work within pre-existing modes, trompe-l'oeil objects, sculptural busts, and modernist-inspired collage. These modes allow me to respond to the world as it already exists, while trying to make a dynamic, individualized experience through subjective intervention. This is a piece called Bluffs and Broken Bottles. Forever Vicky. Helen from a show I had at Library Street Collective in 2018. Plaster bust cast from a clay sculpture of an invented figure, then adorned with found objects. A mold was made, and then it's all plaster with a handmade wooden structure that holds it and acts as a pedestal. Her counterpart, Roy, who I really think is like the quintessential Florida man in a way. An example of the way I might use tropes of modernist collaging, this piece called Fractured, Ecstatic, and Staying In. My tastes are fairly relativistic. I can understand images and processes that are for the most part objectively understood as beautiful or ugly or good or bad. But when I work, they are all just different aesthetic gestures that hold opportunity for creating complexity or meaning in conjunction with each other. An idealized sunset, grotesque dream imagery, sentimentality, carefully constructed surfaces and colors, frantic automatic marks, defacement, or a compassionately rendered portrait are all simultaneously beautiful and hideous. I take a lot of inspiration from work that is often deemed amateur, art journals, illustration, poetry scrawled in notebooks, bar portraits, tattoo designs, and bad bathroom graffiti. I'm interested in the very subtle distinctions between professional and amateur outputs. Many of us do purchase the initial indexes of our activities at the same art or hardware stores, after all. Buying into and relying on the promises of late capitalism, as we do in so many other aspects of our lives. This seemed like an appropriate image there. It's a painting that I still find really problematic, and I'm uncertain why I keep including it. I think everyone who makes something works from a primary impulse to translate their emotions, ideas, and lived experiences into a form outside of themselves. This longing is where the essence of art exists for me. It's in the initial shopping for materials and processes that the meaning begins to become diffused in the sense of its primacy, but expansive in its relationship to the outside world. I primarily use an airbrush. They sell them behind the counter at the art store, as well as other places. I love the persisting cultural connotations of the tool, as well as the way it makes effortlessly diffused and mediated marks that invoke blurred photography, memory, or miniaturized vandalization from a tiny spray paint can. At my core, I have found that I'm interested in flight, light, flotation, labor, leisure, language, and longing. I also tend to deal with the simultaneity of material reality and synthetic rendered dream spaces, the distance between an ever-shifting here and an as-yet unknown there. Over time, I think more about the ways my compositions are full of societal meanings and iconography. Even dreams are directly related to our lived experiences. There's something close to truth that can present itself in an unfiltered, imaginative, There's something close to truth that can present itself in an unfiltered, imaginative production. It's not so much about making sense of the cultural or political realities I live in as making an accurate nonsense of them. This is a painting called The Room, titled after a Sartre short story. That's my little sister posing with a giant planter teacup at a big box store. Family members making it into art again. I show this one. I made two paintings of my little sister. This one, Diva and the Swan, related, of course, Alita and the Swan. My little sister's Instagram handle is 24-hour Diva. This is Quiet Intersection, a painting that I think is interesting in terms of the kind of societal meanings that make their way in through these impulsive decisions. A scene that seemed to call for the kind of emotion evoked by a random gas station on the side of a highway. Resort acumen, taken from actual experiences witnessed at a terrible, all-inclusive resort in the Dominican Republic. I learn about myself through working, not in the sense of an isolationist or self-important navel-gazing, but in the way that a fiction writer might perpetually discover themselves through the process of creating fully formed characters and worlds that exist outside of the room they are working in. This is With or Without Hinges. It reminds me a little of my very first studio. Even when it's ambitious in scale or production, my work is minor. Perhaps in the way that Deleuze and Guattari described the work of Kafka as a minor literature. It's not about a grand formal statement. The ideas are often not great or even good. Someone becomes a giant bug is the type of premise that an elementary schooler would come up with and be praised for. Its quality is derived from the invested and nuanced relationship of parts within an often flawed premise, the navigation of language itself and construction of surprising sentences and moments. And this is the largest work I've made, a billboard in downtown Detroit. The piece was called Weather Permitting. I'm terrified of heights. It took a lot out of me to get up there and do this. Sometimes I deal directly with various classes of labor and activity. Or the restful debris in the periphery of a work site that can be stared at in a paused moment. Or the fractured respite of returning home to a pleasant sunset on a work night, knowing that tomorrow is coming soon. This piece is called When Rent Was Due, D-E-W. Vacations, hobbies, pastimes, bedtime routines, and other deliberate forms of leisure are fascinating to think about within the context of art. They are things that are looked forward to and idealized beforehand. While you're engaged in them, it's easy to be disappointed and realize that you never fully escape your other realities. Supposedly restful activities are often anxious and imperfect before becoming retroactively idealized again in our memories. There are also issues of different classes of leisure surrounding art. Those who make it as leisure, those who view it or collect it as leisure, and those who produce it as a job for the sake of leisurely consumption. These images are from my show in Minneapolis last fall, titled Tenuous Leisure. This is Mixed Blue, a diptych of two separate images rendered on hand-cut treated plywood puzzle pieces, then disassembled and intermixed, so forever intertwined, this kind of dream image, and then a more restful, blown-out image of someone in a backyard is actually what it was. I called these cloud-gazing paintings. They were a compounding of rendered images of automatic painting onto cloudscapes that I had made automatically, and then I compounded and complicated it with this kind of provisional afternoon craft time aesthetic. Oh, and I actually, earlier today, thought about Rebecca when I was looking through this one. There's the word blister in this, and then there's this stigmata, which I then thought, stigmata or blister, and then it made me think of the Balzac piece also, and I'm not going to get into it, but... and this one is like the ever-present targeted advertisement with the faint glowing red bulb that is almost always somewhere in the room. It says Sprite. I have a lot of reverence for the ideals and objects of minimalist art, and for the rigorous, researched, coherent unity of many conceptual practices, though these strategies are very different from my own. I think there is the common goal of creating a language or catalyst for human experience that is as of yet unknown or unrepresentable in any other form but the one presented. I don't look for this to happen in any straightforward or unmediated way with my work. Which brings me back to the death of painting. It may be passé to state this, but painting's not dead. I see paintings every day that I've never seen before. It still exists with all the agency and basic ideas it has held as an activity since the caves in Lascaux were smeared with material. Its current history is, however, a veritable junkyard of associations, cultural indexes, societal roles, and systems of value. I've always loved junkyards. When I was a kid, and now you're like, he's talking about his childhood, I always lived around various accumulations of junk. I would take old hubcaps, tires, and broken sawhorses and assemble them into spaceships, planes, and flying machines. There was never any chance of them functioning, as they were just an abstract amalgam of wrong and incongruous parts, but through the kind of self-deceptive play that is nearly impossible with a cynical adult mind, I had the sense that they might. I'm thinking about my current work in similar terms. I've always loved ascension paintings, whether Raphael's Transfiguration, Blinky Palermo's Blue Triangle, or the contemporary works of the artist Catherine Bradford. I'm drawn to the proposal that a work of art can point to a transcendent, sublime, unknowable, unrepresentable experience outside of itself. I'm interested in portraying people, usually these days invented amalgams of people I have known, sometimes myself. They are often caught in the erratic circumstances of paintings that imply a feverish compounding of everything, but they tend to be looking elsewhere, perhaps towards those unnameable subjects in the distance. This painting is from the last year in other states. Scraps. And this is all work that I've made in the last 2 months since moving into the studio at Cranbrook, continuing in this idea, and continuing in different directions and modes that I've worked in the past. All of this work, I think, though, is connected to each other via fragments of landscape or material abstraction that act as a shorthand for unquantifiable sublime moments. This one is called Mona and Lisa Wait for Reality to Set In. I'm not attempting to create an overarching, unified new aesthetic in my work. The modes and processes I work in already resist this. I hope to utilize tropes and long-established indexes in nuanced ways, with a camp sensibility to point at glimmers of human experience that exist outside of the piece, yet are specific to each painting. Or in other words, I want to make failed ascension paintings out of wrong and discarded parts that, when experienced with the right level of delusion, can transport you to a new and particular place. And I have scrawled in quickly here, with the linguistic discrepancies only heightening the sense of longing. These are other paintings that I've been working on. And I think that if some of the premises I'm talking about seem a little bit of a long shot or confusing, they are that to me as well. And I love the idea of attempting towards something impossible. I was thinking today, something I learned working in the trades is if you make your goal too attainable, you'll work yourself out of a job. This is What Eve Gnaws. The art teacher, working with these types of abstraction reminiscent of geometric modernism, also stained glass, and a little bit like the Neo-Geo reinterpretations of modernist languages that happened in the 1980s. But still definitely narrative. This is a painting called The Whole World. DJ Tonight. And a painting I finished last week, Afternoon Talismans, continuing the kind of evolution of these coloring book paintings and then working them into these ideas that I'm thinking about in other work that I'm making alongside of them. And then finally, these are images of paintings that will be immersed in an installation by Martha Mysko in November. Much of the imagery and color is derived from the objects that they will be surrounded by, so they'll be activated in a completely different way than they operate as standalone paintings. So like this is a plastic jack-o'-lantern on the right-hand side that will be part of the piece, and then the flame decal is on a basketball that sits near the painting. And that's it.